Recording in progress.
I would like to call the Thursday, April 11th Advanced Plans meeting to order. May we have we have announcements? Or no?
I don't think so.
Let's just have roll call.
Sure. Sure. I can do that.
Mr. Hicks?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Present.
Mr. Warren?
Here.
Mr. McKay?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Miles? Sir, you have a quorum.
Okay. And staff attending is Justin, Scott, Mary, and oh, yeah, okay. And Jeff. All right. We have meeting summaries to approve.
Can we do all those at one time, or is because of?
I don't think so. I think there's some abstentions required.
I would move to approve the February 8th summary.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I abstain.
Abstain.
No, it has only me down as.
Move to approve the February 15th summary.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Okay.
Move to approve the March 14th summary.
Okay, any discussion?
I'll have to abstain.
Oh, there was not a quorum, right? So we can't really approve. Huh? We can approve it today?
You can approve the minute. We can approve the minutes, just because there wasn't a quorum.
Okay. So who made the motion? And who second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Be Cindy? And Chuck, wait a minute, Chuck, you weren't there.
Yeah, it was just Deborah, you and I.
So who made the motion?
He can make a motion.
He can?
He just can't vote on it.
You sure?
Yeah, you can still make a motion.
Okay.
I'm not the legal guy.
Yeah, that's permissible. These minutes are for, they are summary minutes and they're not used in a judicial setting. So we're okay with this.
I learn something every day. Okay, we have a virtual meeting discussion led by Justin.
Yeah, I'll turn this one over to you in just a moment, Joe, but it came up last week, at our last meeting last month, the desire of some committee members to potentially hold virtual meetings. I will say that staff did a little bit of follow-up on that. We did check with both legal and with our technical folks to see if we could accommodate that from a legal standpoint. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, you were comfortable with doing so as long as we were also offering that option to members of the public. And then from a technical standpoint, we are certainly capable of hosting virtual meetings. Our technical staff did not have an issue with the ability to do so. So that's kind of where we are from a staff standpoint. I'll take any questions, but also we can certainly have a continued discussion.
Let me just make a comment. I guess I've been kind of the driver behind this. My intent was not to let the public talk virtually and only limit the number of times that any board member could attend virtually. There are times that people want to attend, but I don't want it to be a habit. I mean, if they're out of town or something and really want to attend because of an agenda item, I think we should accommodate that. So I was going to propose that we limit the number of virtual meetings that any member can miss to 2.
I'm okay with supporting this, and again, I have to mention that the first part of last year, for months and months and months, I was ill. And it was a real challenge for me to be here in person, and so, I wasn't. So, for that reason, I think there's certain things that come up where a commissioner is traveling or something like that, maybe they're ill, and are able to participate, just not able to be here.
So, since I'm
Mr.
the new guy, I got a question. Are there any rules related to missed meetings where the commissioner cannot serve any longer? I know that, like Park Board and other, I didn't see it in the bylaws, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, if you miss 3 meetings in a row or 50% of the meetings through the course of the year, you're subject to being replaced.
So it's the same rules that apply to all boards and committees.
Wait, we have another comment here.
Yeah, I would add that that is for City of Wichita appointees. It's different for county appointees.
What's the county?
And
Still, it's gotta be unexcused.
that's correct. I mean, we have allowed for, like I said, medical reasons or something of that nature. I just want to say that I checked with both of my bosses and they said that you cannot allow the committee members to appear virtually if you don't allow the public because of things that they have researched and whatever. I didn't go beyond what my bosses told me. So,
But doesn't the city and county do that?
not that I'm aware of.
I thought they did.
Didn't have any hearing.
No.
The city don't have hearings, they just have a consent agenda for what we do.
Well, but there may be a hearing if somebody petitions for it.
In response to that, your question, Joe, I believe that that has come up at the city council level once or twice when council members have called in to participate, but
There is an attorney general opinion on that, where it was considered, an emergency scenario, somebody was able to call in and it was considered valid. Honestly, I'll have to go back and get specifics as to why, but they were pretty both adamant about, it has to be open in that sense, and I don't know what the emergency scenarios would be that it would allow somebody to, a committee member to appear virtually.
I know when I was appointed to something, I don't know what it was, and I went to the county commission meeting, I think 3 of them were virtual, 3 of the 5. And they do hear appeals. I mean, they hear every case of ours, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I would not want to, I just don't want the public to be able to speak virtually. And so, therefore, we can't do it, in my opinion. Yes.
We're making it more complicated than it needs to be. We seem to be past the days where coming up with a quorum was a problem, and doing a lot of these types of things was helping with that.
Right.
But I want to be consistent. If we're going to have virtual meetings, then every meeting should be virtual. I don't want to come in 1 week wondering if it's partially going to be virtual or not. Let's just either make it all in or all out.
I'd agree. So
Are we taking it off the table then?
if there's no motion,
Were you thinking just for this advanced plans or for the entire advanced subdivision and the full body?
what? I think we had to recommend to the full body, didn't we not?
I think it depends on the scope, but I think ultimately, even if it was just advanced plans, I think you would want to have a discussion at the full MAPC just so that the other members are aware, because there's always a possibility that other members could get assigned to this committee and vice versa.
Okay, I'm not ready to make any motion. Anybody want to make a
Well, the only thing I
motion?
gotta say, Joe, is that years ago when this wasn't attended like it is now, we'd have 1 or 2 people, and there was a number of times, if you had more than, I think it was 3 or 5, I don't remember which it was an automatic open meeting. Is that right, Jeff? There's a number attached to make it an open meeting.
Well, if it's a quorum, it is. If it's not, then you're not even supposed to
That's
hold
now,
the meeting. Yeah.
it's that way now, but it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember subdivision meetings where we would have one member there and they went ahead with it because it was deemed a mere recommendation to the MAPC. But that has changed, obviously, since then. The bylaws have changed.
Yeah, Scott?
And I would also share that we do advertise these as public meetings nowadays, regardless of how many people show up. It's a public meeting.
Could you imagine what it'd been like when we went through this solar deal if we'd have gone and had the virtual situation?
Yeah. Okay, so is anybody?
20 people said we're talking to a microphone to one person or two people.
Does anybody want to make a motion? If there's no motion, we just go on. There's no action required. Seeing none, next item. Scott? That was easy.
All right. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity to talk about the MAPD budget. I think we do this almost every year, so this is a chance to circle up with you all and let you know what the programs are, options are that the planning department is submitting. Now, part of this presentation, I've got quite a bit of information about what we've accomplished in 2023. So it's a recap on that before we get into what's being proposed for 2025. So with that, next slide, please. Okay, so looking to collect feedback, share ideas with you. And then as always, opportunity for questions. So just stop me if you got questions as we go along. Next slide. So we'll go through all of these items. It's actually Planning Department 2023 and then 2025. Sorry, I didn't get these dates updated, but you can see the general outline of how we'll proceed. Next slide. So a lot of things go into our budget ideas. We look at our financial context. So what's the city looking like? What's the county looking like? We look at our performance in the prior year. So in this case, 2023. We look at our mission and goals. And then we also look at what are some of the trends that are out there, some of the community input and feedback that we're getting. All of that goes into our budget proposals. Next slide. Next slide. So there are, in terms of the greater context, again, there are two really important documents when it comes to financials for the city and the county. Those are the CIP and the budget. CIP deals with infrastructure and capital, so big equipment, land, structures. The budget deals with staff, projects, and programs. So today we're focusing on what's being proposed for the budget. Next slide. So in terms of scheduling and timing, by state requires that the budget be submitted. It used to be in August. I think they've actually adjusted that because of COVID into September. And so there's a KSA about that. And also with the CIP, the schedule can vary, but typically they do those in August. And you all are familiar with the CIPs for both the city and the county because they come to you every year seeking for your vote or information about whether they're in conformance with the comprehensive plan. Next slide. So the outlook, much like it was last year, the information we received was that the city and the county are expecting that that expenditures will exceed revenues. And that is a trend that we've seen for a number of years. So things, I think, were a little bit better, most recently because of some of the federal funding that was provided along for the COVID, and also because we've seen a quicker recovery than what people anticipated. But over time, out into the future, we see that there will be expenditures exceeding revenues, and that'll create a difficult environment. Next slide. So next slide. So in terms of our department and how we operate, how we're funded. Next slide, please. So our mission, as you're aware, we do professional planning. We do a lot of things in terms of subdivision zoning. We also do licensing and enforcement and permitting for the city, only for the city in those areas. And we do all of this in order to help accomplish the comprehensive plan. And a couple of things that are really important, and I think things that you all debate and discuss when you have zoning cases in front of you, is the balance between growing the economy and providing opportunities for living well. And not that those are in opposition, but that those are, I think, some couple of important factors that come up in a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the cases that you all are presiding over. Next slide. So in terms of our services, again, zoning, subdivision, comprehensive plan. Next slide. We also do area neighborhood plans, historic preservation for the city. Next slide. We do that out of the Reagan Building. I think you're all aware of that one. Next slide. And the way that it's funded is through a interlocal agreement. This is what provides for our structure, but also our funding. And that's between City of Wichita and Sedgwick County. Next slide. So out of that interlocal agreement specifies 50-50 contributions from both the city and the county. So one community puts in an extra $1, the other community needs to match it. The one thing that's a little bit different about this is that zoning enforcement was created, it was moved up to planning through the creation of MABCD. So that division is different. In that instance, the costs of that are reimbursed by the fees, some of the fees that MABCD collects. Next slide. In terms of where our services fall, how those are provided to us as well. So legal, we get that from both the city and the county. We fall under the umbrella of the city when it comes to financial operations, also for HR, IT, and for fleet vehicles. Office space, obviously the county, and then communications, both organizations. Next slide. In terms of where we stack up, this is a little bit older. This is from the 2022 budget. But in terms of expenditure for the county, we are just 2 slots above noxious weeds. We came in at about $700,000 support out of the general fund from the county. And that puts us in between emergency management and crime prevention. So next slide, please. And again, a little bit older, this is 2022 data, but for the city of Wichita, again, you can see the numbers match with what the county's spending on the planning department. And for the city, $659,000, and that put us just below the city council and right above housing. Now, you might question, well, how can housing be that low on the list? And that's because of the federal funds that they use to support their operations. So, and that makes up, you can see in both of these, so for the city, we make up about 0.25% of the general fund that the city has. And then Isabel and Ty Ben, if we can go to the prior slide, I'd like to see what that percentage is or was. And in the county, it was less than even 0.25% of the general fund expenditures. So let's go to the next slide.
Are you saying we're insignificant?
I wouldn't say that we're insignificant, but we're very efficient. How about we'll put it that way? In terms of our revenues, shoot, I thought I had updated this one, but so we do charges for services, and that is at the end of the year, what happens is that a budget is drawn up. Both organizations contribute 50-50 for that. The payments that are received, there's a transfer from the city general fund. There are payments that come in from the county. Those are put into a separate fund within the city's overall financial structure, and that's called the planning fund. And then we do charges for services, and that is also put in there. At the end of the year, if there's any surplus that's left over, it's divided in half. Half of it goes to the city, half of it goes to the county. So in terms of our revenues, the payments from the city make up about 30%, county about 30% of our revenue, and then fees and charges for services are about 20%. And then the remainder is the reimbursement that we receive from MABCD for zoning enforcement operations. Next slide. And in terms of our expenditures, overwhelmingly, the majority of our expenditures are on personnel. We don't have a lot of contracts. We don't have a lot of equipment or buildings or anything that we're responsible for. Next slide. In terms of committees and structures, well, of course, there's the city council and the county commission that we're responsive to. Then, of course, yourselves with the MAPC and the BZA, and then the subdivision committee and advanced plans committee. And then, of course, there are representatives from MAPC and a number of other committees as well. And then for the city, we also staff the Delano Design Advisory Committee and the Historic Preservation Board. Next slide. In terms of our structure, we have 4 divisions and we have 20 FTEs. I think actually it's about 20.5 if you put in the part-time temporary position. And this does not include our interns. We're going to hopefully have 1 intern this year. We've had 2 in the past. That kind of comes down to office space and resources. Next slide. Next slide. So in 2023, where we finished up in terms of the work that we do, this is a measure of all the cases that we process since 1985. You can see that you've seen this before, but you can see the big spike is about 2006. And in 2023, we were up, and you can see it's a gradual climb. We had a little bit of a decrease in 2023, but that I think is just because of the various types of cases that we measure. Still a lot of work going on. Next slide. And I think we've got a table in here that'll show that. In terms of the work that we do or did in 2023, the overwhelming majority were zoning cases. And so if you add up zone change requests, administrative adjustments, conditional uses, PUDs, all of those amount to quite a bit of the cases that we did. You can also see that there were quite a few that were subdivision and plating cases. So next slide. Here's a snippet from the table that we used to track these cases going back to 1985. And we've got a column here that notes the difference from 2022 to 2023. So you can just see that it's a whole variety of different case types that we measure. And so you can see that our zoning for the city was up 66 in 2023 compared to 61. Zoning in the county was slightly down. You can also see that conditional use permits were up. So you can just go through the table and you can see.
Scott, do you have
differences
a way of tracking the number of employees that you've had over the years? I'm specifically looking at the number of cases and work that you did in '06 and the staff size that you had then compared to what you have now.
Yeah, great question. It's actually on one of the next slides. Because I think it's great that you logically went there, because that's one of the things that I wonder about too, is just how efficient are we and the amount of workload that we have relative to the resources we have. Next slide. So in terms of cases, you've seen these before. So these are, I thought that slide should have been in right around here. We'll see if it pops up, but if not, I can get you that data real quick. So you can see that last year in 2023, we did 275 cases. These are non-subdivision cases that came to MAPC. It's not the total cases that we processed, but I do this to show the amount of workload that's happening with staff who are doing the staff reports and presentations and DAB meetings and all of that. The number that I'm really conscious of is I look for the median number of cases that are coming to the MAPC. And right now our staffing in current plans allows us to handle about 10 comfortably. I wouldn't say comfortably, but that's what they're staffed to handle. Last year we were at 11.5. When we get above what current plans can cover on a regular basis, we start to see people working longer hours. We start to see advanced plan staff having to do planning cases. And so there's a variety of different things that we start to do to shift. We also have, though, fortunately, some temporary staffing that we can call on to help us out. Next slide. There's really no rhyme or reason to zoning cases. We've measured since 2020, we've looked at our case patterns in terms of the volume that are coming to you at the MAPC, and it swings up and down pretty wildly. And you can just see where we were last year in terms of cases. And what I keep an eye on again is how many times we have meetings that are above that staffing level in a row, because that's when we start to see people who are starting to get burned out and need to get away. And fortunately, we got some breaks, reprieves where people got to catch their breath every once in a while. Next slide. In terms of subdivision cases, we were actually lower last year than we were the year prior. But again, it's a trend of increasing cases overall. And the thing that I would point out on this one is, I think on the next slide, we've got the number of lots created, if I remember correctly. Let's go to the next one, if we can, Isabel. Okay, next slide. This is where we were for this year. Yeah, it doesn't show it, but we have a graph that shows number of lots. And although our total number of subdivision cases were down, the number of lots were up, which means we're getting more larger subdivisions with more lots that are coming through. And those require quite a bit of review just because there's a lot more area involved. It's a lot more complicated. In terms of cases, it went to the city council. What we see is they're distributed throughout the city. The things that I would call out to your attention is the CUPs, which are this aqua color. These are showing up where we've got commercial development that is 6 acres or more. So you can kind of see those kind of on the fringes. Then there are also PUD cases, which are this light purple. And you see them spread out throughout, but really kind of concentrated in kind of the center or core area. And those are where custom zoning is happening. And I think in a lot of cases, that's because we have a unique development or we have something that's just doesn't fit into our regular zoning pattern. Next slide. These are cases out in the county. So again, you can see every district in the county has cases, and there's different variety of what those cases are. Next slide. In terms of staffing, so we had 5 staff additions last year. We had 3 departures, and we continue to hire. We have 4 positions that we're currently hiring for. And so out of staffing of about 20 FTEs, that's almost a quarter, almost 20% of our staffing level. So we hired quite a few positions last year, and we continue to do that. And we've just seen with retirements and just kind of churn that happens in the department, we've seen continued hiring efforts. Next slide. And these are all of the positions. We have had almost 100% turnover in the planning department since 2020. The division that's been the most stable since then has been zoning enforcement, and there are 3 staff members there who have been here since then. Other than that, we've had 100% turnover. Next slide. Again, that's our organization in terms of the 4 divisions. Next slide. Okay, in terms of general trends, and then we'll get into the program options. Next slide. So I think you've seen these before. I think these trends still relate to today and in the future. So increased competition for talent and investment among communities, constrained fiscal environment, which we talked about, demographics. We saw a trend when we were doing the comprehensive plan. I think that's really kind of borne out that we're seeing smaller household formation. We don't see that as much here in Wichita, but we have seen that nationally, and I think that those national trends will continue to catch up with us. We see demands for more housing options, and I think that is borne out in kind of what we've seen in the housing market in terms of duplexes and patio homes and different types of housing. Also, what was the accessory apartments? We've seen quite a few cases for those. More emphasis on design. That's been a question that's come up as there's infill that comes in. I think with new development out on the edge, if it's near a farm field, I think the design can vary widely from what's already there because it's farm field. I think when we see more infill, I think that's when the questions about design start to come up. Attention on equity. That was really a conversation that happened a few years ago. I think that continues. And then iterative changes in transportation. I think land use and transportation are so interconnected that as we see those changes happening in transportation, that affects the land use and the patterns and how that's done. So next slide. So in terms of our department trends internally, so in terms of retirements, we've largely seen that wave happen. There's a few more that'll come up, but they're not for a few years at least. So I think we've made it through that. In terms of service expectations, there's an expectation for more and better technology. And I think that is really going to be the thing that's a multiplier for our department in terms of staffing. If we can have technology that helps people answer their own questions, get those resources, I think that's going to make us more efficient. And then caseloads and projects, again, continued volatility. I think it's going to continue to go up from what we've seen in the local Wichita housing market. We see that housing prices continue to increase. We see continued demand for new products out there. So I think we're going to continue to see demand for cases. Next slide.
So in terms of 2024 budget, this is a recap on what we were approved for last year for this year's budget. Next slide. So one of them was to adjust the planning fees for inflation. They had last been updated in 2018. We're in the process of doing that. I just saw the staff report to go to the city council, at least the draft. The thing is that the fees need to be set by the city council and by the county commission. So we'll see where that dialogue goes. So that will go to both governing bodies. Airport hazard tool, airport hazard zoning code update, and hazard map. Those are all initiatives that we brought forward as a request in 2023 for this year's budget. When they looked at it, it was determined that the airport authority would be the one to take that forward. And so they've actually hired 2 consultants that are working on those. So we hope to have something to show to you and review with you related to the airport hazard zoning code. And those would apply only to the airport authority operated airports of Jabara and Eisenhower. And then we'll see how those look, and that maybe that would be an opportunity to talk about maybe other airports in the area.
Scott, can you educate me a little bit on what is an airport hazard tool?
Yeah, so when we'll see development applications, Topgolf is a good example. They are in close enough proximity to the airport that when they put in the poles for their nets, they exceeded, that cap. And so the airport hazard tool, what they've done now is they've got 3D technology that you can actually look at it and you can say, okay, if this point is here, how does it relate to the airspace? So it's really neat, because otherwise we end up with just, graphs and 2-dimensional things that we're trying to measure things out on. Planning Department temporary caseload support, that was something we requested last year and we were approved for. That provides us with a small amount of money to hire a consultant to help us out, or to bring back temporary staff, like retired staff, to help us out. Aligning parking minimum requirements with community goals. That's a project that we're just beginning to work on. We were approved for that from both the city and the county. And we're in the process of, we've got an RFP that's flying right now. We're waiting to see what kind of proposals we get back on that one. And then the last one is short-term rentals. We had a whole bunch going on with short-term rentals in terms of licensing and zoning code changes. I'm really pleased to be able to tell you that with the regulations that were approved and changed, it resulted in us having to do a better job of monitoring where these are. And so we have a tool now. We've got a contract with company Granicus. And just last week, they provided access to us. We can see where almost 600 short-term rental units are in the city now. And they have an accuracy, they've got about 80% of them identified in terms of their location. So now what we can do is we're uploading our licensing information so that we can tell which ones have been licensed by the city and which ones have not. And then we're planning on sending out letters shortly, I'd say in the next few weeks here, 2 or 3 weeks, to about 50 of those to let them know that they're not in compliance. And we're going to bite off chunks as we move forward throughout the year. And the goal is to get them all licensed. Yes, sir. So the question was, is an Airbnb the same thing as short-term rentals? For the definition of the zoning code, it now is. But in terms of how they actually operate, they can be different. Bed and breakfast typically has an operator that's there and will cook breakfast and will kind of monitor things. A short-term rental is generally you're renting a dwelling unit, whether it's a house or carriage house or apartment, and there's no one else generally there. Yeah, is usually the expectation, although they can have just a room in a house that's already occupied, or maybe the accessory apartment in the backyard. Yeah.
Scott?
Yes, sir.
Through the last few years, we've had special projects. Last year was solar.
Yep.
We've had people in places.
Yeah.
You've got short-term rentals. Does this list that you show here, does that bring in everything that you anticipate in the next 24 months?
No. In fact, these are just the things that there was a budget approved for. There are things that we are tackling in-house without any additional resources. And so the MAPD update is generally an overview of where we are with those. But in terms of what's coming in the next 24 months, we do have, there's another few slides in here where I'll talk about what our requests are for next year.
You've accounted for those in your budget?
We've tried to. That's one of the things that that I personally think we've got a challenge with, and I've got a challenge with, is determining what the priorities are from both the city and the county, because they both have independent, different priorities. And so how do we respond to both of those? And that's an effort that I'd like to bring forward and review with you. Because I think one of the ones for next year that you'll see is the Midtown Plan. And that raised that very question of, is the Midtown Plan the top priority for the city, or are there other priorities? Yep. And for the county, we know that there are 3 projects waiting in the wings. We're working on solar right now, but we know that they want to update the zoning code. There's at least, I shouldn't say they, there's an indication that there's support for updating the zoning code to require a sign, a notification sign for zoning cases. It's not required out in the county at this point. And then also discussion about what to do with entertainment venues and short-term rentals in the county.
Can I ask a question about short-term rentals?
Sure.
So if a place has been rezoned to be allowed hotel motel use, they still need to get a license?
Yes. Hang on. So for short-term rentals, the license is required, yes. If they are operating as if they're operating as a short-term rental, yes, they have to get a license regardless of whether or not they've got the zoning. Now, what's going to happen though is that when we send these letters out, there's going to be hundreds of them that will not have the appropriate zoning permissions to operate, because most of them operate in residential zoning. And so when they go to get the license, they'll be told, I'm sorry, you can't get that until you have the zoning approval. And that will cause lots of zoning cases to come in.
All right, I'll get my license.
Well, I wasn't directing it specifically at you, but if you fall into that category, yeah, we can help you out if you got any questions though. Okay, next slide, please. So 2025 budget, next slide. So these are all the program options. I've got slides that will go through these. Next slide, please. So temporary caseload support, same thing as what we did last year and the year before. We're requesting $7,500 for a total of $15,000 to give us a little bit extra manpower if we need it to process cases. So, because we see so many ebbs and flows with cases, we just don't know what's going to walk in the door until the applications literally do. So, next slide. Missing middle, housing patterns and fast track development process. This is an option to help implement the Places for People plan. We've seen this work done in other cities. So Overland Park, Kansas City, Seattle. And what you do is the city would contract with a vendor to develop plans for, and they would work with the neighborhood association. And what they would do is hire a consultant that would develop plans for different types of dwellings. So whether it's accessory apartments or a common one, it could be duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, whatever the demand or need is. And then if a developer chooses to use these designs, it's a choice. If they choose to use these designs, it would be set up we would set them up in a way that they would not have to seek additional zoning approvals for it. So it's a fast track of these types of buildings if you use the design that's developed. Fayetteville is another city that's done this. We've seen this range from large cities to small towns that have done this. So this would be to do a pilot project of this and probably work with 1 or 2 neighborhoods on this and to constrain it to just duplexes or accessory apartments. But we'll see where the conversation goes on it. But that's the initial idea. Next slide. So again, the attempt is really, single family seems like that market is working. Mid-rise, I really think that the financials on that make that kind of really complex and a little bit difficult. I really think the sweet spot would be kind of that missing middle. So for duplexes, accessory apartments, all the way up to a triplex or something on that order. Next slide. And here's some examples of what some other communities have done. And what you do is you make one iteration, and then you can do variations on that theme or that structure just based on the porches and windows, etc. Next slide. Another one then that we are requesting is task management system. We have a lot of variety of tasks that come to our department, so being able to keep track of those and assign those to people, I think would be very helpful for us. So we're requesting 5,000 from both communities for a total of 10 to be able to try this out. Next slide. Office designs is a request. It'd be $7,500 from each jurisdiction for a total of 15. And this would give us an opportunity to do designs to convert some of our storage spaces into office spaces. Because at this point, we're out of workstations, and we have held off on advertising for 2 intern positions because we simply don't have the space. We did one of them, but what we're doing is making a scanning workstation, essentially work for the intern. Next slide. Comprehensive plan update. So we're requesting funding to hire consultants to help out with this. There's 3 elements I'd like to update. One would be the locational guidelines. So those are the text in the comp plan that says, it gives us information when we're making a recommendation in the staff report about whether or not it's appropriate to recommend approval or denial. Some of the ones that have come up lately that I think, we don't have a set list on what this is, but one that I'm thinking is used car lots have been something that's been kind of interesting lately. Cell towers have likewise been another one. So we'd see what issues or topics raised to the top on that one. Second element I'd like to get updated is 2030 future growth concept map. There's been some cases where that's been really pivotal. I can think of the area near Wesley where it shows a lot of employment around the hospital, and it's currently residential, and it's kind of a question about that. Also, just generally throughout the city and the county, do we have our locations correct? And then the 2035 urban growth areas, of course, with solar, this has been a big topic, but I think revisiting this with cities and finding out if we've got the right areas identified would be important. So the request is $25,000 from both city and county for a total of 50 to do this work.
Why does the third bullet point include the word infill? Is it required that the comprehensive plan focus strictly on infill?
Oh my gosh. No, this is, I'll tell you what, this is probably can we go to the prior slide? Okay, now let's go to the next one. Okay, I think I understand what I was communicating here. So, so the tax base, by promoting infill development that meets community needs and achieving community goals, it's a great question. What I would say is that if we've got a comprehensive plan that is updated on a regular basis, it should hopefully help reduce conflict between proposals that are coming in and neighborhood area sentiment. Can't say that it always will, but hopefully it would provide some guidance that can help people out in that situation. And by reducing that conflict and helping to meet the needs of folks in the area, hopefully we can get better and faster development. I'll have to go ahead and revisit that one. Next slide. Midtown plan. So alluded to this one earlier, but requesting funding for the Midtown plan, $20,000 from each jurisdiction. And this one has come up because we've had a number of cases in Midtown recently that have been controversial. The neighborhood association has been pretty good advocates at saying that they would like to see this update. And so for these reasons, that's why we're recommending an update on this one. 2 other plans that we've recommended in the past for funding have been a plan for the area around Wesley Hospital and also one around WSU, because we find when you've got employment centers that are really a going concern, or at least they're growing and there's economic activity, it can create a lot of kind of pressure and create a lot of conversation about what should happen around them.
Sorry for all the questions.
Yep.
What is the rough boundaries of the Midtown neighborhood?
Roughly it is, I think it's Murdoch, and it goes to the river on the west. It goes to the north, I think maybe 17th Street, somewhere in that ballpark. And then on the east is the railroad tracks, if I remember correctly.
It would include the Via Christi complex.
It would,
Okay, thank
yeah.
you.
So Next slide. Okay, and I think that's it. There was one outstanding question I wasn't able to get to. And I'll tell you what, I'm gonna look it up when I get back to my computer, if that's okay, Mr. Fry. But we do have the percentage. I think my recollection is that our caseload has gone up something like 50% since 2014, but our staffing levels have gone down by about 20%. And I just picked 2014 because it was one that we had good data for. So, yeah, but I'll confirm that when I get back to my computer. So with that, any questions, feedback, input haven't discussed so far? Okay.
Well, I would just like to, sobering thought, because it was early in your presentation, the projected budget deficit in 2027 of $22.5 million. And it currently shows in 24, it says zero, that it's a balanced budget. But if you look at the 25-26 budgets, there's significant deficits there. And the city's using reserves to help offset some of that deficit. But it's a very bleak picture. And so every dollar is going to have to be scrutinized. And that's one of the reasons why I was asking the questions about staffing caseload versus what you were able to do in 06. So.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right.
Seeing none, we'll receive and file.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, some updates by Justin.
Good morning, everybody. Justin Constantino with the Planning Department. Just a brief update on the solar moratorium. As all of you know, the moratorium was first put in place back in October of 2023. We have met as a committee several times during the period from then until now, and on February 15th, you guys reviewed those draft text changes to the Unified Zoning Code and recommended a full approval to the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. On February 22nd, the full MAPC did vote to recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners by a vote of 13-1. On March 6th, the Board of County Commissioners voted to extend the moratorium for an additional 6 months to September 13th. For the purpose of hiring a professional consulting firm to review best practices and assist with the process. On April 3rd, the Board of County Commissioners received an update from Deputy County Councilor Kirk Sponsel on procuring a professional consulting firm. The Board of County Commissioners deferred the agenda item to June 5th, so 2 months. Essentially to June 5th to revisit that item. The moratorium is still in effect until September 13th. So Councilor Sponsel did give a brief update. He is still in the department. The law department with Sedgwick County is in the process of procuring that consultant to assist with doing a desktop review of what we've done so far and potentially looking at trends nationwide on that subject. Any questions regarding solar?
Next item, College Hill Neighborhood Plan. I guess you're up still, Justin.
Sure. So planning staff is working with the College Hill neighborhood stakeholders to develop a plan for the College Hill neighborhood. The plan would serve as a guide for future policies, programs, and infrastructure. We are working with a consultant and a 15-member steering committee that was appointed by the City Council back in November of 2023. That stakeholder committee is made up of residents, business owners, and stakeholders. On March 25th, the project team hosted a community kickoff meeting, our first public kickoff meeting, from 4:30 p.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. at Grace Presbyterian Church. The meeting allowed stakeholders to provide input on several topics in the neighborhood, including housing, mobility, development trends, community image, community character, and more. In terms of turnout, it was a success. We had approximately 200 individuals attend, which is what we were aiming for. We had 180 unique sign-ins to the event. And a lot of good feedback was received from those individuals that attended that meeting. The next step will be taking the information that we received from the attendees of that meeting and releasing a public online survey using the data collected. And we hope to have that public online survey released within the coming weeks. So please be on the lookout for that public survey. There will also be a map feature that will be part of that as well, called the Social Pinpoint, where individuals taking that survey can specifically point out specific areas in that neighborhood where they have concerns or general interest. Any questions on the College Hill Neighborhood Plan?
Seeing none, let's bounce back to Scott and talk about the MAPD update.
Certainly. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and do that from here. And you've got a handout in front of you with the MAPD update, the printed version. This is an opportunity to just go through where we are today. On page 3, you'll see our graph showing our non-subdivision items. And so far, year to date into late April, we've got 80 cases that have come through. That puts us on pace to be slightly less than what we did last year, but still in that neck of the woods. So we'll see where we end up next month, but I think we're on track to do almost what we did last year. Page 4's got the numbers for you if you want to dig into those. Again, the one that I keep an eye on is our median number of cases that are coming before you, and we've got 10 and a half is where we're at so far this year. On page 5, we've got subdivision items, and again, that's been lower this year. We're not on pace to meet what we did last year, but it'll be fairly similar, we expect, to what we did in 2019 is what it's looking like. However, just as we talked about a few moments ago, page 6, number of lots that are being created is still pretty substantial. We've seen a number of large subdivisions with urban, suburban scale lots coming through. So at bottom of page 6 is the table with the details. And then page 7 is a larger table that has just the case counts coming to you at MAPC. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that have exceeded our current plan staffing levels. So we keep track of those. Page 8 is our staffing levels. So you can see that we've got 29% vacancies in terms of administration, 20% in current plans, and 25% in advanced plans. And a lot of that's driven because we have such a small division, so just one position being open can have a big impact. We've got more information about hiring on the next page, and then an overview of our short-term rentals. And we've talked about that. I just would highlight again, we're real excited that we've got that system with Granicus up and running, and looking forward to the next step, which is letting people know about compliance and encouraging folks to get
Scott, can I ask you a question on the short term?
Yes, sir.
I think we discussed this at length. If they don't follow the rules and they're penalized, what penalty is there?
Sure. Well, I'm going to turn to Jeff for help on that one, but I'll tell you, number one, if there's, with the licensing, if there's 2 violations in 1 year, they can lose their license and lose the ability to apply for a license in the near term, so the next few years. If it comes to a zoning where they're operating and they're not in zoning compliance, they're not seeking to get zoning compliance, then we go through the regular zoning enforcement process where we send them a letter. They've got a period of time to get into compliance or make application, and if they don't, then we proceed eventually to the courts. But Jeff, turn it over to you.
I can't remember the specific amounts, but after we go through that, there is civil liability for failure to comply.
I guess my question is that we know there's going to be somebody that slips through the cracks somehow, some way, that whether they did it on purpose or accidental. And so we never did really come up with any kind of, if that is if they intentionally continue to do so, I guess is what my problem is.
Yes, if they intentionally continue to do so, then they'll be found in violation of the municipal code, and that process will ensue. Jeff, if you want to say something about that.
No, it is an ongoing. I mean, if somebody does not register with one of the services like Airbnb or Viber or something like that, and they just do it randomly, it could be hard to find and to enforce it, but it would be based on complaints or notices that we receive from neighbors or something like that. We'll just have to stay on it, but will be an ongoing effort to keep the enforcement in place.
And to Jeff's comment, though, with Granicus now, we know where the majority of these are, and it's only going to get better in terms of locations. So we will know where they are. We will have records that they've been advertising, because it it pulls the data straight off of Airbnb or VRBO, and we've got a record that when they offered it, how many stays there's been, it tracks quite a bit. So when we go to court on these things, we're gonna have a pretty tight case, I believe. Well, they comb about 50, they comb about 50 different providers is what they claim, so. Okay, well, maybe you'd fly under the radar.
That's really the reason why I asked the question.
You're trying to sleuth out on property here?
Chuck, do you have a question? I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Can you just, in about 2 sentences, explain what we're allowed to do in the city of Wichita for short term?
For short-term rentals? Well, you're able to operate it pretty much as you wish, as long as you're able to get it licensed and you have the zoning approvals. And the zoning approvals really come into play just in single-family zoning. It's commercial, multifamily, generally, you don't have to worry about it, but single-family you do.
And what is that?
What do you mean in terms of the approval process?
Yeah.
So you come in, make application, then what we do is we mail notices to the adjoining and abutting property, so property across the street, property right on either side and behind you. Then if fewer than 50% of them submit a protest against your application, then you're approved by administrative permit, so you have the zoning approval to continue. And that approval will run with the land until such time as zoning's changed at a future date. If more than 50% of folks do protest it, then it becomes a conditional use application and will come before the MAPC, DAB, City Council.
Thank you.
Scott, how many of those did you get last year?
Well, last year we actually did not have any. I don't believe. This year we've had 12 or 13. And again, that is without any notification outside of just what we post on our website, no real communication strategy effort. But now that we have the Granicus system, we're getting ready to send out a batch of letters. We'll see what the response rate is on that.
How much time do you think this is going to occupy of your staff?
Yeah, that's one thing I've been concerned about. That's why in the budget for last year, they approved for this year, they approved using some of the licensing revenues to help fund an additional zoning enforcement, part-time zoning enforcement position, as well as hiring a part-time consultant to help out with processing the zoning applications. Now, from what we've seen so far, the ones that have come through have not been controversial, and I'm curious to see if that remains the case. But we won't know until we get a bigger pool of applications.
So it sounds to me like this is pretty high up on your priority list. Is that true or not?
We're paying attention to it. Right now, with solar and budget and performance evaluations, I got a whole bunch of stuff, but we're monitoring it and we talk about it almost weekly to get a status review.
Chuck, do you have a question?
If somebody thinks that there's a problem, that somebody in their neighborhood's operating illegally, who do they call and how does that, they could call dozens of numbers. How does that filter down to getting to the right person?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things. Number one, if it's a party or the large disturbance or something happening, and they should call the police, and the police will address that. If it's an issue where they suspect that people are operating not in compliance with the zoning code, then contact zoning enforcement, and our folks downstairs will take the lead on getting them notified and working through compliance with them.
Is there like a city 911 number?
No.
A catch-all number that is, get on the phone, call the city?
There's not. I would suggest if it's an emergency, call 911, or a disturbance, call 911. If it's the zoning and it's not an immediate thing, but you want to see it get addressed, call our number 268-4421, and they will transfer you down to the zoning enforcement folks. Yep. Now, with that said, the Granicus, part of the Granicus contract is they are setting up a hotline that people can call specifically for short-term rentals, and that will be staffed 24/7 so that they can respond to folks. But again, if it's a disturbance or something that needs to be addressed immediately, you can call 911.
Anything else? Okay.
Well, that's one way of doing it. if you could, sir, I've still got just a few more things I want to go through with you. Nightclub in the city, we're pretty much wrapped up on that one, just closing up the files. Duplex designs, that's on hold. I think we can take that off the list. Public notifications, that went to the last DAB 4, to get comments. We're going to put together a white paper on that. We'll get that out to y'all for review. Event permits in the city.
Well,
Sorry.
regarding that, public notifications, does that get heard by the MAPC for any changes or any
Yes.
recommendations?
Yes, because it would be a
Okay.
change to zoning code, would be my intent.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, we've got event permits in the county. That's on hold just because we've got our plates full with solar right now. College Hill Neighborhood Plan, you got an update on that. Parking and zoning, that is one that's out for RFP. Daycares and zoning, know that that one is on here. There's no upcoming events. However, what I would note, we probably ought to change this in the future, is that we are working on a white paper that we were requested to do some research into what other communities are doing and do they allow daycares to operate by right in homes without the owner of the house being present or being a resident. And so we're doing research into that and hope to have that completed shortly.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Any questions? Seeing none, we come to the time in our meeting where we have public comment. We're limited to 3 minutes. Mr. Rothwell, do you want to talk?
Hello, committee. My name is Johnny Rothwell, resident Sedgwick County, also business development manager with Ready Industries, and I wanted to come and share a few comments and just questions about solar and just what's going on with the moratorium there. I have a vested interest at Ready. We are interested in doing the fencing around these solar projects as well as potentially any trenching work, at least the opportunity to bid the work. Can't guarantee that we're going to be the lowest bid, but we'd love to have the opportunity to work with these businesses. I feel like we're a little late in the game with just developing relationships with these solar companies and offering our services to them. So, we're excited to potentially work with them, and recently found out about the moratorium that's going on. And I'm pleased to hear that this committee has come up with recommendations and everything to be passed by our county commission. And just, I guess it's concerning to hear that there was a moratorium. We've filled that moratorium and now there's yet another moratorium. We do have a vested interest, in the business side of it. But personally, I'm a big advocate of solar. I have solar on my own residential property. And I just think there's a solar revolution going on across the globe and all over this country. I mean, Texas now, 10% of their energy comes from commercial solar farms, more than coal. So Kansas is so abundant in wind and solar. 20 years ago when I was in college, I remember everybody having lots of concerns about solar projects. And fortunately, we worked our way through those things, and now 40% of our electricity comes from wind, and it's been a huge success in the state. We can have that again with solar, and they complement each other so well, wind and solar, because their high peaks of production are at different times of the year. So I'm encouraged that you all, I thank you all for the work you've done with solar and advocating for it, and hopefully making it possible here in Sedgwick County. We definitely want to be a part of it as a business if we can. We're going to try our hardest and win that work on our merit. I just hope, and I've emailed my county commissioner as well, just advocating that they move forward, and to your point, sir, I don't know your name, but there's budgets, there's costs that are involved. In my mind, this committee has done the work. What is best practices? Why are we now hiring another consultant and paying more money to do essentially the work over again, at least as a part of the public in my mind? It's like redoing the work that this committee's already done. This isn't new technology. It's been around for my entire life. There are huge solar farms all over this country that are going up all the time. I think we need to be a part of that. So thank you.
Johnny, I wouldn't say that we have advocated it.
Okay.
Is that fair? I mean, we just look at what comes before us.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
No one else? Okay, let me ask a question. Today at the MAPC, we elect a vice chair who becomes chair of this committee?
Well, great question. So there is an item on the MAPC agenda for election of the vice chair for the MAPC. Now, the vice chair by the bylaws must be on Advanced Plans Committee. However, they do not necessarily have to be the chairperson. The MAPC chair appoints the chairperson for both, the chairperson for subdivision committee and the chairperson for advanced plans.
Okay,
Now,
so it's not automatic that they're chair of this.
yep. And I think in the past, I think the consensus has been to have the vice chair of MAPC appointed to be the chairperson of advanced plans, so they get the practice of running the meeting, the experience.
I think I say that, don't I?
Yes, there's an election that's held after the committee appointments are made. And yes, that election has happened. So unless you want to revisit that item. But
We have a list of eligible because do they come from the city or from the county?
So that's correct, because on the subdivision committee, it is a county appointee. And because Mr. Dool is a county appointee and he's the chairperson of the full MAPC, therefore the vice chair should be a city appointee.
Okay,
We can certainly print that off. You bet. Yeah, we'll have that available.
so I don't stay vice chair of the,
No, sir, I think you would, unless you want to revisit that item, but
no, I'm fine with it.
my understanding is you would remain to be the vice chair unless the Advanced Plans Committee decides to take up a vote on that again.
It's not real hard. Okay, next meeting. Other business, other business. Nothing. Next meeting is May 9 at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Staff is well prepared.
Thank you. If I could, I'll do one quick advertisement for 2 additional positions that are open for members of the MAPC. The City of Wichita has a Delano Design Review Advisory Committee. There is one position for an MAPC member on there, and that's currently vacant, so just want to let you know about that. The second one is the Wichita Sustainability Integration Board. There's a position for an MAPC member, and that is vacant as well. I would encourage you to get in contact with Mr. Dool, and we will look to him for a recommendation.